Bloodborne is over 8 years old at this point, so I took a retrospective deep dive to see if it's still a masterpiece. What's up nerds and welcome to Endgame. I'm Hoops4 and I recently completed Bloodborne and the Old Hunters DLC to see if it should still be considered a masterpiece after these last 8 years and counting. FromSoft's catalog of Soulsborne games are loved by fans all over, but perhaps none are loved more passionately than Bloodborne. The Lovecraftian horror, the brutal and aggressive combat, and the world building have all been praised time and time again. But does it really hold up that well? Let's go ahead and enter gaming.
Enter gaming.
There are plenty of characteristics that come to mind when you think of Bloodborne, but the aesthetic is perhaps the most iconic. In my opinion, the opening level in Central Yharnam is one of the most memorable opening levels of all time, and that is in large part thanks to the gothic horror town of Yharnam. The atmosphere is tense and haunting, with the deranged huntsmen around every corner. It certainly is memorable from an aesthetics point of view, but how is it to play? One of the most memorable opening levels, sure, but it's also one of the most punishing ever. There's a tiny tutorial before it throws you into Central Yharnam, and it is an absolutely brutal introduction to the game, basically forcing you to learn and master the game's mechanics before you move on. You have to learn to lure enemies, how to split groups, how to counter effectively, how to manage resources, how to handle tough enemies, and how to take on a boss at the end of all of it. Absolutely brutal. And if you don't know what you're doing, it's a devastating momentum killer before you can even get started. This can be the end of the game for new players, and I can hardly blame them. Being a welcoming game for new players is not really Bloodborne's thing. Besides the difficulty, the streets of Yharnam also teach some of the Souls-like staples, things like the interconnected map, enemy drops, and level up systems. Now of course it doesn't tell you any of these things, but just experiencing it as you play through is eye-opening. And of course you get your first taste of bosses, with the pair of introductory bosses giving you an example of both boss archetypes. A beast boss in the Cleric Beast, and a humanoid boss in Father Glasgoyne. Moving the analysis past the opening level, the aesthetics take a gradual trek from gothic horror to dark sci-fi themes. Going in blind, this gradual change was absolutely mind-blowing to me, as the complex story unraveled before me. I was shocked at how cleverly the game's world building shifted between two incredibly different themes with gothic horror and cosmic horror, while maintaining an interconnection and fascinating storyline. This shift is still incredible, as very few games, if any, have managed to pull it off quite like Bloodborne. A quick request, if you are enjoying this video, then please consider subscribing to the channel. Most of my viewers are not subscribed, and it would help me out a ton. One of the other defining characteristics for Bloodborne is the aggressive combat. Now, Bloodborne differs from its other Souls game brethren pretty heavily in this department. Most of the time in Souls games, you are encouraged to use a shield in your offhand to block or parry, but Bloodborne, being aggressive as it is, puts a firearm in your offhand. This gun can be used for an aggressive countering mechanic, opening your opponent up to a deadly visceral attack. Additionally, Bloodborne introduced a rally system, where, after taking damage, a portion of that health can be recovered by dealing damage of your own. Once again, this is encouraging the player to be aggressive. One last different point with the combat is the trick weapon system, where each weapon can transform between two different styles. For instance, Ludwig's Holy Blade switches between a greatsword and a normal sword. Other iconic weapons include the threaded cane, the hunter's axe, and the saw cleaver. Looking back at all of these unique combat mechanics, how well do they all work and hold up? In my experience, I found the trick weapons to be an incredibly unique gimmick that has yet to be imitated, but I found it fairly impractical. I found myself sticking with one weapon form that I liked and only switched when absolutely necessary. The whole switching mid-combo thing was a neat idea, but I have a hard time seeing it be useful outside of niche situations. However, the rally system and the firearm offhand weapon are incredible. To me, these two unique characteristics of combat are some of Bloodborne's defining factors. No other game has mastered this aggressive style of combat quite like Bloodborne. it still stands as one of the best ever and one of a kind in this matter. Now, with the combat, you need enemies and bosses. First of all, the enemies are unique and frightening, and I never felt like I saw the same basic enemy too much. None of them were too terrible to handle, outside of the Scourge beasts, which are the worst, and if you don't know how to counter them, you're in trouble. And the freaking Winter Lanterns that will end you before you know it. They absolutely suck. But with these exceptions in mind, the other enemies are manageable overall. It is interesting to see the enemy types evolve over the course of the game, as the thematic goes down the rabbit hole of sci-fi cosmic horror. Then we have to talk about the bosses. These range from iconic to gross and massive beasts to humanoid. There is a ton of variety, and I have my opinions on all of them, which I'm going to share in a tier list coming in the next couple days. Some are memorable, and some are just not at all. Personally, I prefer the humanoids over the beasts. I thought Father Gascoigne was an amazing first boss. Well, required first boss, that is. And it really sets the scene for the game. But I did not particularly enjoy bosses like Amygdala and the One Reborn. As far as level design, Bloodborne still masterfully crafts each world and each area with care and attention. I continuously had my mind blown by the next shortcut to open, or the next secret area to find. The thematics are so well designed, and like I mentioned earlier, the gradual thematic change is so well crafted and executed. Outside of a couple annoying places like the Winter Lantern Bridge and Nightmare of Memphis, I never felt overly frustrated with the design or the enemy placements. Not every level and world is the most fun to get through, but the majority are. And it looks great too on a technical level. The graphics are still holding up, as it is a great looking game. The environments are crafted and look in such a way that they really manage to instill feelings in the player by themselves, without even adding in the enemies or the lore. And the graphical prowess is a large part of that. But on a performance level, things haven't changed. The 30 FPS is still painful for this kind of game, and I had several moments of dropped frames, especially in boss fights with large amounts of particle effects, and that sucks when everything is based around perfect movement and precision dodges. We can all wish for the day where we get a 60 FPS port, but unfortunately, even 8 years later, that doesn't seem like it's coming anytime soon outside of a couple rumors that circulate now and then. The Old Hunters DLC is a great little addition to the main game that introduces some great new bosses, including the infamous Orphan of Cause. At the time of release, the Orphan was known as the hardest boss that FromSoft has ever made. Now that title probably belongs elsewhere, looking at you Melania, but Orphan is still no cakewalk. My favorite boss out of the DLC was definitely Lady Maria, and I really enjoyed the new areas introduced in the DLC. It is definitely a must-play if you get through the rest of the game. I did feel like it was maybe a little short, but I also completed it after the Chalice dungeons, so I was definitely over-leveled at that point. But now, since I got the Platinum Trophy on this retrospective look back, I have to talk about the worst trophy of them all, Yharnam through Marion Queen. This trophy requires you to go several layers deep in the Chalice dungeons, which are just a slog to get through. I waited until almost the end of the game to dive into the dungeons, and even still, after the first couple, the rest were quite challenging. I found myself trying even more on the bosses in the dungeon than bosses in the main game. The levels are just boring, and the enemies repeat a ton, and the bosses are mostly repeats or reskins with a few exceptions. This was a trophy I never hoped to do again. However, I haven't let it tarnish the rest of the Platinum experience. Overall, it's a great one that I would do again. On that note, if you haven't played Bloodborne, or haven't completed it, I have to highly recommend that you do so. If this is your first time with a Souls-like, then you will still be in a world of frustration, so beware. But if you are someone who got into Souls-like with Elden Ring, like me, then Bloodborne is still a masterpiece, still a must-play, still absolutely worth doing everything you can in the game and getting the Platinum Trophy. It really is still that good. No doubt this is a game that will continue to age like fine wine, and there will never be a bad time to play Bloodborne. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this Bloodborne retrospective. Let me know your thoughts on Bloodborne down in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, then please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more awesome gaming content. I will see you nerds on the next one. Peace. Thank you for watching, right here on InGame. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content.